Hello.
Been a been a long time almost, it seems. Feels like.
Yes.
I mean, especially on the things that I have released on my channel. And but we have been doing other things, right?
Yes.
I
Yes,
remember.
I've
Yeah.
been on Unslaved uh, earlier this year.
Yeah.
Talked about the age of Gemini.
Oh yeah, you're into a lot of astronomy, right?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I heard that one. It was really good. And you had also been working with Nate, right?
Yes.
And I remember I was there for like 3 hours at one session with you.
We're yeah, and that's still gonna be released. It's just slow because he perfects everything.
Mm,
Um, and we've cultivated a really good audience over there.
mm.
Um, just looking at the comments, we don't have a huge audience, but everybody there is really cool. So,
I think that's the most
yeah,
important thing. It's not about the numbers. I mean, if you can attract like a couple of hundred interested and people that take the information seriously, is worth so much more than you know thousands of followers. I would say it's those serious people that have genuine interest in it. I think not like sound bites or anything, or passing time activities, because the topics that we usually talk about is usually quite heavy topics and important topics, if you ask me.
absolutely.
So today you sent me a little list with some topics that
Yeah,
you have been having on your mind, I guess. And
yeah. From our previous discussions and
mm,
everything that I've followed your work on
mm,
and all of your appearances, um, a lot of the questions I've been mulling over.
I see.
Um, these four are some of the most, uh,
It sticks.
yeah,
Well, you have been pondering.
yes,
I can really understand the first one, this Tor friends. It has the word Tor or touring in it. But you have
yeah,
because of I know that you have been touring with your bike, for example.
yes,
But this then we have the second topic is about the year 1050. Very
yes,
interesting date. And then third is about alien visitation and genetic manipulation.
yes,
And the fourth is the ringlands.
yes. So that's such a wide spray. It's like a shotgun blast effect, right? Scattergun kind of. It's
Yeah.
here, there, and everywhere. But
Well, I see it.
four things, and I know that we'll time together somehow.
Mm, I can
But
see it.
yeah, but no, those four things are something I've been mulling over quite a bit. The tour friends we've talked about a little bit, and yeah, that one just from what you've told me, um, it's I know it's like for a year, right? Like these tour friends, it would be two people who would tour for a year,
3 years
3 years. Oh, okay.
in the old heathen system that we had up here, and at one point all over the globe, according to the Finnish mythology, there was a system where you were uh, like sort of matched into tour friends, and it consisted about two people that were sharing nature gifts with each other over this period of 3 years. For example, if you were good at something and I was good at something and we wanted to learn from each other, then we can exchange that, talent or interest. But there are more to this Tor. Because of the hidden system is also a very complex system when it comes to, it's not what is ideal today to be friends.
Yeah.
But we don't need to go further into the more detailed. But the Tor, or Tor we say, that's like the origin etymology. Tor means root backwards. It has to do with the culture, or the kultur, and the Torshammar, the clitoris, and there's so many words that has Tor or Tor in it. But also this
Well, there's also in Norse mythology, you have Tyr and Thor.
Yeah, this Tor, but he is symbolized by the hammer, this Thor. He smashes some anvil in sky in the Norse mythology, and off come lightning. But it's also a metaphor for erection and the sensation of, coming. The lightning and the sperm it's so connected. But that's to go even further. But Tor in itself, if you look at the English, the Tor has to do with touring around, or going around, or hiking, or traveling. And we have a word in Swedish called natur or natur, which is also connected to this, which means nature. And na has to do with knowledge, and tor has to do with touring or traveling also. Because the heathen culture is a very touring culture. It's a moving culture, because via the caravan or the trade routes you could say trade routes, the caravans.
Well, if you think about today, most of the very spectacular natural places in the world are tourist attractions.
Yeah, that too. Because they are touring there. This is sort of the thing, if you imagine you are in a situation where you can just spend 3 years doing whatever you want, except some obligations, but a very free culture where you have, you are not forced to work like you do today. Especially the more gutty people, or the peon or träl in the heathen system, they don't have as many duties or obligations as the higher caste in that system. Today is sort of the reversed in many ways, that everyone is so responsible and everyone should do this and that to exist on the planet. But in the heathen days, it was a different kind of focus, according to the Väinämöinen or Bocksaga. It's a different, but we can see the traces from the language, like we are doing now, how things are preserved into the language and stored like a bookshelf almost inside our languages on the planet. And it's interesting, we can sort of see how more and more people are starting to understand this linguistic, and you can approach it from a lot of different angles, from different kind of languages. For example, German or France, or Finnish, Russian, perhaps. But anyway, it attracts a lot of people into investigating their languages. We have sort of a backlash on the audio there now.
Is there something coming through?
Maybe because you kept quiet for a while. Yeah, it's coming through.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the way that tourism is today, which is very brief and very superficial, and you have the natural places, these natural wonders, these places, that the tourists flock to, and what I've seen is that it's detrimental to the locals because of this influx of tourists, and even the tourists are so rushed, and they're just swarming around in this mass, and crowding up the place and everything, and it's but it generates all of this money, not necessarily helping the locals, okay, so a tourist town is going to have a lot of money coming into it. The town itself is going to be able to raise a lot of taxes, and they're going to have nice roads and everything. There's going to be jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But as far as the whole point of the thing, it's the fact that it's a very special place on the earth that people want to go to and visit. And the locals themselves are sort of crowded out of their own place that they live in. As far as that goes, there's places where you there's national parks that you have to reserve online to get reserve a date to visit, and so many people want to go there that when they open up the website at the beginning of the year, every time slot is booked within 30 minutes because people go online and pay for their reservation, and within 30 minutes all of the time slots are reserved. So the locals don't even get to visit their own park that they live by. And you have all of these RV people living in their RVs, going around. It's a huge mess. And, I think people get what I'm saying, and they can look at the situation and be like, yeah, this is kind of messed up. But there's no signs of it changing because of the money that's generated from it all. And it's sort of like a rat race. So just being able to, save up enough money throughout the year to be able to travel out to some place you want to visit, take the time off of work and get out there, and also it's it's an independent venture because you're going to be doing it either with yourself or with your family or maybe with your significant other. So it's independent to that level, and with the discussions that are going on about the downfalls of independence or the downfalls of individualism, that's one of them, is the idea that we look at it's been described like this, is that the technology we have allows us to do things independently as individuals that would be impossible to do in the past because those things would have required a community to do in the past. But now we have access to benefits, services, goods and services, and all of these things that essentially allows us to use the technological advantages and everything to completely make ourselves single functioning units. But if any of that stuff broke down to a significant degree, we'd really realize how illusory that independence is with the things that we rely on. But being as how we've relying on these new technologies to live our independent lives, we've allowed the community structure to deteriorate. So, we haven't necessarily cultivated a network of people who, and also the skills that it takes to cooperate with people or negotiate with people, because we just go out and get it ourselves. So this is not me asserting a preference of saying that I would rather, whatever. These are just these are measurable things, right? Like you can measure it. It doesn't necessarily mean that one's good and one's bad. I'm just saying, these are measurable things. So
I think it's become somewhat unnatural, especially with how you can just take an airplane and travel. It's so. Imagine how it was before to travel those distances. It takes 1 hour to fly from where I live to Stockholm, but it would take me like a week by foot or horse perhaps. I mean, there's no touring in it, and now you see how people can move from one place to one other by skipping continents, and you can just put a lot of people in one area. There's no like exchange between the people going there. You just end up there, and that's a very good example here in Sweden, how you see they have placed all like the foreigners from the Middle East and Africa. They put them all in enclaves, in the south. And if they have some spares to the north where I live, they also end up in enclaves, apart from everyone else. I think it's so unnatural. That would never happen if you have like a caravan of people moving. I don't think so, because then you would need to interact with people on the way, and you would maybe end up somewhere else, or it's so unnatural with the type. When I went to Greece now, when you're speaking about the tourism and how tourists flock places, I was fucking shocked when I was in Athens and visited the what do you call it, Acropolis, where the temples are on the mound there in the middle of Athens, where you can find the old temples of the old Hellas culture. And
when you got up there, you had the whole place to yourself, and it was so quiet that you could hear birds chirping on the mountain across the valley.
Man, there was like a 2-hour queue in with people in circles, and a lot of people were standing with their selfie sticks, and they sort of experienced the entire thing through the camera. And this is not how I experience things, I want to be there, But all
Damn.
those fucking tourists, man. This you would be like very lucky if you even got a little place where you can stand and look down at the wall there. That was like encombing the entire structure. But I was so sad. When we're talking about touring and touring around, this is like a touring for me. And just the destruction of this culture, man, makes me depressed. The Hellas. It's in the middle, it's in the Mediterranean Sea. You have on the south, you have the Middle East and this kind of influence from the Muslims. And so I'm talking historically now. And then you have the Catholic Empire on the west, and then you have the Orthodox on the east, like crossing straight between. According to the book Saga, the center of the Orthodox and the Catholic sort of headquarters were on Crete. And the west part of Crete was sort of the seat for the Catholics, and the west, the east for the Orthodox, and the west for the Catholics. And you have Hellas in between there, or it was a part of the Hellenistic sort of empire.
The last dynasty of Egypt was the Hellenistic dynasty, I'm pretty sure.
Well, they have a lot of things in common. You can see in the architecture. It's pretty close with the pillars and how they constructed it. I've been to Egypt twice. I've seen the constructions of the temples there also. It's the only difference is that in Hellas or in Greece they have destroyed all the statues, and you would be lucky to find one statue intact. All the faces, all the sort of lingam or the
Well, the Nile River from Egypt goes into the Mediterranean Sea, and directly out from there is Greece.
Yes. They were a connected
Common
culture.
Say again.
Well,
say again. They were
according to Book Saga, the Egyptian culture were sort of given over, or the seat of the Egyptian empire had problems, so they asked for help in Hell, which is the Finnish culture with the Aas people, and they sent like people that were supposed to govern. So you can find like orange hair mummies and all those kind of strange connections to the Scandinavia, England, Ireland, these type of people, because Ireland and England, they were really close to the Swedes and the Finnish.
Now get this. Commons Beaumont does an analysis of Greek mythology, and in his estimation, Greek mythology was based in Britain. Because the Greek mythology, so when you read the descriptions of the places in Greek mythology, it's easier to match the landscapes and the descriptions to places in Britain than it is in Greece. So the implication is that the actual events of mythology occurred in Britain, and the mythologies were written in Britain, but the contact that they had by sailing between Greece and Britain, it was the same people. So the mythologies simply traveled to Greece, and since it was the same people living in both places, the myths just took root in Greece and were written and shared and told in Greece.
Well,
And
there's a very there's a very good what do you call it? Etymology, or if you play with words a little bit, you have the Hellas, which is the Greek culture, and Udenma or Helsinki can also be explained or called as hell, which is exactly the same word but sort of backwards. As hell, hell as. And if you look at the old meridian line, or if you draw a line from Helsinki straight down, you go straight through Greece and you split Crete in west and east Crete, which was actually the old meridian line before the English stole it and made it Greenwich time. But the Hellas culture in itself, if you go down to Greece and listen to what they are saying in the Greek language, you can find a lot of correlations with the Scandinavian or the Boksaga, how you understand the words. So by knowing Boksaga, you can sort of figure out what words means, even though you can't even understand the language. But if you pick word by word, you can break them down. I think that's a cool thing, and it sort of give a more velocity to it all. I have this double, it's sort of mumbling thing when I talk. I don't know if it's on my end or if it goes through yours. If I talk?
time.
Yeah.
Is it doing it now?
No, it started a little while ago.
Is it still doing it now?
No. Oh yes, it's coming back.
Oh shoot.
I don't know what it is. Maybe it's
Stuff-
doing for your speaker.
Well, I'll try to fix it.
Do you think you have?
But
have
one
a
more
headset?
thing about the tour. One more thing about the tour friends before we talk about 1050. What would it look like if say we started the tour friends on our channel and we said, hey, this is the new starting today, tour friends is a thing again.
Well, it wouldn't be. I think it's the most practical thing that you can imply from Boksaga, because you don't need to apply all the heathen stuff into it. Or before it was very ceremonial, you could say, and we gave each other gifts, and that's what friends can do that to appreciate each other. But at the end of the 3-year cycle, you gave the other person something that you made by yourself, like a necklace or some an artifact, or what you call trinket. And by the end of your life, you would collect all those gifts from your tour friends, so you would sort of become more and more. And it's also a symbol of the knowledge that he gave you, I would suggest. So you would become more and more and more the older you get.
Another thing, the word tour friends, it seems to it strikes me with this impression of like they're going out far and wide. Is that the case, or could it be like, well, they're neighbors and they just walk to each other's houses, and they're not really traveling very far?
I don't know, but if you, so this sound. Wait, I see if I can mute you while I talk.
I'll do that. Let me see if I got
See if it works. Hello? Yeah, now it's much better. So the idea is that if you pick a story from the Finnish culture, the Arctic culture, meanwhile, sort of the before the Viking Age, but late Ice Age, you could say. There's a story about when a young man is about to become a man, he has to go through this trial to kill a bear, and he has to do it by himself. So imagine the practical, if you think very practical about this, you're supposed to locate a bear and where it sleeps, and it has to be a female bear. So when they're having cubs, or when they go into Ide, they are staying in a hole in the winter. Well, I'm not sure how bears work entirely. I presume that the male bear also go into some kind of hibernation. But anyway, you have to scare out the bear, and you have this kind of lance that is called one star. And star in Swedish means also to annoy, to make noise. We use it all the time still today, one star. But one star can also be one lance or pole. But this young man, he had to kill the bear by himself in the winter. Imagine just this sort of exercise. Then when you apply to the Tor friends, if it was like a cultural thing to just find out a bear and kill it in the harsh winter, then I should maybe suggest that touring around with your friend wasn't so strict. You could probably travel. You could do, I'm not sure if you wanted to go to the coast of Norway, maybe you could do that also. Maybe go to other places. I don't know. I have no clue, but I know that people had a role in the society, and maybe the older you get, the less you tour around, I guess. But I'm not sure. The Finnish people actually have a more detailed compass to go with, because the Finnish language contains in more detail about what would go on in the heathen culture. The Swedish or root language, we just to make clear, the Swedish language is called rotsinkiale, which means that we are singing root, but they are like hybrids, variants. Up here in the north, we are very much influenced by the more Finnish root speaking group. But anyway, it's kind of the same. It's only in Stockholm it really differs, or the area around Stockholm and up. But inside the root language, you can find more of the keystones in how all the languages is built. That's why it's called root, I guess. The root, the first language, according to the Finnish mythology.
So let's move on to 1050.
Yes.
1050 is a date that you spoke about in your first Unslaved interview. And I did not, I listened to it when it came out, and I wanted to listen to it again in preparation for this talk, but I haven't had a chance to. But what led up to 1050? From my own research, I know that there were a ton of conflicts going on in Scotland between the Vikings raiding Scotland. Vikings seem to be raiding a lot in the 900s. Then, with 1050 and what happened in Helsinki, a mere 16 years later, 1066, that's when the Norman invasion happened.
Mm.
So, and not long after that, so 1066 to 1118, I believe it was the First Crusade. And so that's a difference of only um, for 52 years or so, if I'm doing my math right, but 50-ish years between the Norman invasion of 1066 up to 1118. You have the Crusades happen. So,
Well, that's according to the papacy, right? But if you mute your mic, I'm gonna talk a little bit about it. This is quite interesting, actually. The 1050 is the date when Sweden comes under the Catholic. And leading up to that, you have, you're talking about the 900. The Vikings are raiding Scotland and, pillaging here and there. The famous stories about Ragnar Lothbrok and Björn Järnsed. They are raiding all the way down to Mediterranean. They wanted to burn Rome to the ground. They wanted to, just plunder all the goodies that the church had been, in the churches and all of these things. So we can see how, maybe there's not so much written history except in the Vatican Library, but according to the Finnish Väinämöinen book saga mythology, the Europe fell one after another coming up from the south. I think England is around 700 or 800. Same with Scotland and Ireland, I would think. But the Viking invasion, in my eyes, is more like a stand against the Catholic forces, you could say.
I also want to add very quickly that according to Connor McDarry, who is really rewritten the history of Ireland, and he calls these Roman and British historians liars. He's brought out the issue about St. Patrick, which the story about St. Patrick says that there was an Irish king who had a hostage, which essentially hostage has a certain connotation these days. It essentially meant a foster kid. So an Irish king sent a foster son to the Romans. And the way it was, the reason it was called a hostage is because kingdoms would send important members of their family to another kingdom to live there. So in a way it was a hostage because if relations went south, they those people have important people in your family, so you don't want to piss them off too much because they have, they kind of have you by the balls a little bit because they have your blood, with them. But on the positive side, it fosters a relationship because if they go live with that kingdom first for a bunch of years, then when they come back, they have knowledge and everything, and it creates more of an understanding between the kingdoms, right? Well, that's the story with St. Patrick. They say that he was raised by the Romans, but he came back to Ireland, and after the Roman Empire fell and it was Christianity, St. Patrick came back and converted Ireland to Christianity. And that is a date around the year 400. And the implication is that Ireland has been Christian ever since 400. And the conversion was a peaceful one, because all it took to convert Ireland to Christianity was for St. Patrick to come over and flap his arms around, and everybody became Christian peacefully. Now, Connor McDarry calls that bluff for what it is, and he says, fuck all that. St. Patrick is a fictitious character. No such thing ever happened. And Ireland did not become Christian in 400. And Ireland did not become Christian peacefully. In fact, it was more around 900 to 1000 AD when Ireland was forced into Christianity. So he calls a whole bluff about St. Patrick. The reason they invented that story was to make it seem like, oh, Ireland's been Christian since 400 and it was all peaceful. Bullshit. So I just want to throw that in there.
Well, it makes sense. If you have more, I think like France is probably 100 years earlier. You can sort of see the further south you come in Europe, the earlier the dates of the conversion. So it's like a wave or coming more and more north, you know. And if you arrive at the 1050, this is sort of the peak. Because I can tell you a story. We had a king line in Sweden that was called Lingaet, and they are symbolized by one lingon. I don't know exactly the English word in this. This is sort of sad, but he was called Anun Hellbrännare. And he sort of sold out where the location of hell was, where Helsinki was situated. So he was going with some what do you call it, the paid soldiers, Swiss soldiers, coming also on the order of the Pope to kill off the Bock family, or the sort of the source of the heathen culture, which was Helsinki, or hell as they also call it, or as hell. So this was kind of a pain in the ass for the Catholics, that to have those guys still around, even though they were very peacefully the Finns. They have never really engaged in the Viking warfare. They are never sort of they are barely even touched or explained or talked about in the history books, the Finnish people. But this Anun Jakob Hellbrännare, I don't know why, but sort of some kind of hostage situation, or by force or whatever, he led them to Udenma, or hell. And the Swiss army, they burned hell to the ground and killed everyone in Helsinki. And but the Bock family, they escaped to the north, and they were staying with the Sami people, who were immigrants from more of the India region. They were coming, like, they have Asian in them. We call them Lapp people or Sami people still today, but you can barely find the original Sami people. They have brown eyes and look very Indian, or they have this more Asian outlook and living in the far north. And they also live in I think you also can find them on the northern part of America, if I'm not wrong. Maybe Russia also have them. But anyway, the Bock family, which was the king and queen of Finland at the time, they went north. And this is just a detail. When they are symbolized by the goat, and the gubben or the old father, Santa, or the grandfather figure, he is displayed going around with 8 goats, representing the 8 powers that the heathen world has. Sort of the same iconography, like Sleipnir, the horse with 8 legs, also represent the 8 powers of the heathen world. And when he got to Lapland, he started to go around with reindeers that the Sami people had cultivated. Sort of, they are living off the land with in sort of a what do you call it? Harmony with their life is sort of, they are, I don't know how to explain this in English, but they are using this reindeer creature, this animal. They are living off it, but they are living in symbiose with them. Even still today, they are having them free on the Arctic mountains, and they are just going around searching for food, and the Sami people are living next to them in tents and all of this. This is a very old tradition that they still have today. But the Bock family were staying up there with them in sort of a hideout from the Catholics. So we get all those kind of stories with the grandfather going around with a sled and 8 reindeers. So this is an icon that we have still today, with Santa Claus going around with the reindeers, you know, coming up from the far north, on the North Pole. And to add, I think people who have been listening to me should know that Hell is the original center point, or the north point on the planet. So it's within the circle of the Arctic sphere, so to speak. Anyway, but to leap a little bit further forth, you talked about 1068, I think, but we have an event where this Anon Jakobs Hellbrännare's brother, because Anon Jakob Hellbränner, he never came back from this crusade against the Finnish coming out from Sweden, though. This Anon Hellbrännare Linga king. So his brother takes over Emund, and in the 1067, Emund and the crown prince to Sweden, the last of the Linga, they go to the suicide rock and jump from the Ättestupa. You know, they have this tradition where they are jumping off the cliff when the life is over. That's sort of an old heathen way of choosing when you are about to go. So the last king and crown prince of Sweden of the Linga, they die out in 1067. So after that, Sweden make a reform in the king system where the jarl is a subclass, or the second highest class of people in the society in the heathen world, and they have sort of an elected king that the Pope in Rome has to choose. So they can send suggestions down to the Catholics or the Pope, and then he make a decision which is to become the king, and we call this the Folkungaätten. And it's determined in a new kind of court, I believe, that is called Ting, that we still have today. Tingsrätt, it's a courthouse. So from that on, we only have Jarl Kings coming out, because this Anon Jakob and Emund and his crown prince, they are coming from the Lingaätt, which you can trace back all the way to Svea and Sven, which is the first king and queen of Sweden since its foundation over 9,000 years ago. Related to Dan and Dagmar, who founded Denmark then. So it's a sort of a tragic story, but that's how it goes.
Just to be clear, 1050 was an invasion of its own, right? It was a military invasion of Helsinki.
Yes.
Uh, and
Sweden had
how
been or sort of Christianized at that point.
how did the years leading up to 1050 sort of transpire to where the church was strategically advancing further and further to get there and take over more and more territory until it finally captured Helsinki?
I can tell you. If you mute the... Okay. This is a very complex situation. The thing that they wanted really was to kill off the king and queen. But they got rid of all the other people living in Helsinki. But this is very hard to control. There was plenty of crusades going up. They arrived in the spring, and the people of the north and Finland, they sort of get used to that the Catholic forces were coming, so they could just hide out in the forests. You know, they know the landscape and their territory very well, so they could do some kind of guerrilla warfare against the Catholics. And I would suggest, you could also see in Sweden that there are like, because you have like those jarls, they have a lot of power. The jarls is an earl in English, and they were in charge of different domains or lands. We call it landsherrar, you could almost say. But anyway, they had a hard time to enforce the rule with the Catholic rule, so it took a lot of time before the Sweden and Finland became organized into such that it became like fully Christianized. I would say it took around 200 years almost to get it completely organized. By the time when Finland came under Sweden on paper in 1250 in the creation of Stockholm, and that's sort of the point where you get Finland on the map, you could say. So we have a king called Valdemar, who becomes like the first Christian king, you could say, over Sweden and Finland. And Valdemar has an etymology in itself which is very interesting. Val means to choose, and mar is like a mardröm or a nightmare. To choose the nightmare. So they are playing with words. So those who could read that know that now the Catholics has total, the deed is sort of done. Now they have it all organized. There were many crusades. I know that even sort of not the good guys, but the more heathen guys, they were also doing crusades, but more against the Orthodox, because the Orthodox from Russia also kept crawling into Finland at some points. So to charge against the Russian in the name of the Catholics, even though you're a heathen, the theme seems to be that it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, but it's more a heathen in a Catholic clothing in many senses. You can see this with the rise of the Gustav Vasa. They are stemming from the Häggström line also. And the Vasa family and the old Romanov probably have a connection too. The Russian and the Swedish has a connection with the top hierarchy. I was actually looking up a little side note about this, about Nicholas and the Romanovs. Gustav III, he was a descendant of the Vasa, but he had a Holstein-Gottorp name in his name also, and Holstein-Gottorp is sort of a German, but it wasn't Germany at that point. It became later, but I think it's from Oldenburg. But as soon as the Vasa line, which is stemming from the old Finnish line via a female line, anyway, took when they killed Gustav III, Gustav IV, this is in the 1800s I'm talking about now, just to sort of track back the ancient houses and their lineages. You can immediately see that the Russians are doing some kind of attack against Sweden, because there have been many wars against Sweden and Russia, but this is just, when you read the history books, it's so black and white, right? We don't know exactly the conflicts in between and this and that. But I've just found it very curious. Why would Russia invade Sweden? They even get to this town where I live in. You know, at the moment when Gustav III is being killed. So, because what happened later is it gave rise to the sort of empire that Sweden has today, which is a shadow empire with the mining companies and telecom companies, energy companies, software companies, all these kind of companies that are building the pipelines. You could say that Sweden is sort of a spy factory from 1800s and up. That's an interesting study in itself, but something happened when the old Vasa line died out, and Russia, and I don't know about Putin and his connections to the old Tsar family, but there seems to be a conflict or a clash of spheres of power that we can see still today. So, yeah.
The way that I'm looking at things, it's really black and white to look at it like Christians versus heathens.
Yes.
And I think that's, and I'll tell you why. It's because look at the amount of pagan statues in the Vatican. Countless. Why do they care so much about paganism in the Vatican? You can go online and look at, just do some Google searches, and they have all of the pagan relics from ancient Egypt, from ancient Greece, ancient Rome, etc., etc. Probably even from Babylon, all of these. So scroll back in history to before Christianity. Rome was waging war against Europe with just as much vehemence as the Christians did later, and it's all coming from Rome. The Vatican is in Rome. So think Vatican, think Catholic Church, think Rome. Before Christianity even existed, the Romans were going out to conquer Europe, Britain. I'm not sure if anything ever happened up as far as Romans trying to sail to Sweden or any of the Scandinavian countries, but the Romans got stiffer resistance from the Germanic tribes than the Celtic tribes, for some reason. Now, scroll back in history to Carthage. Carthage was a Celtic satellite country, and there was that war between the Romans. Well, when the Romans would conquer a territory from the heathens, essentially, it would be Roman paganism from that point forward, because they had their cult practices and everything. So it's pagan versus pagan more than it is Christian versus pagan, because we look at it and we have such a short memory span. All we see is, Christians going in and burning witches and going after the pagans. But throughout all this time, the Vatican has retained the pagan elements within their chambers. Now, it's not out in the open so much. It is to a limited degree if you look at the cathedrals and whatnot. I know you were just mentioning the wolves in sheep's clothing is actually heathen and Catholic clothing, but you're coming at it from the idea of the heathens of the north donning the robes of the Catholics. But what I'm saying is that before Christianity existed, it was still Rome that was the source point of the aggression. And Rome was pagan, and just because they ostensibly became officially Catholic starting in 325 AD with the Council of Nicaea and all of that, and then they started the popes, they started the papacy, and ever since then it's just had this facade of Christianity on the surface. I have my doubts that that's the case. It looks more like Christianity was originally invented for the purpose of having basically a prepackaged pacifier to hand to rebellious Jews, because Rome was actually having a lot of trouble with rebellions, Jewish rebellions, and it was religiously fueled. So they hired scribes to craft a gospel story that they could invent a new. So Rome literally invented a new form of Judaism, i.e., Christianity, as a way to convert Jews into it to make them less rebellious. Now, what's that look like to you? Does that look
I have
like
many thoughts. If you mute your mic, also nothing is new under the sun, right? If you look how the Middle East is today. Before sort of the West got involved with their business too much down in those more Muslim countries, there was no caliphate. There was no like two camps like the Sunnis, or they like to divide and conquer. They make like an opposition within the culture or the religion. I think this has been going on forever. For example, they wanted to use the Swedish people to invade Finland, but they knew that they couldn't use the Swedish people to invade Finland, because then it would live on in the songs and stories, also in the folk tales, so to speak, because they wanted to get rid of and erase the Finnish culture totally. The hell culture. So I think when you're talking about when it's just Catholics and pagans, it's a very simplistic way of seeing it, but I look at it like you have Catholic forces and heathen forces, and how it plays out on the battlefield or in the society. It can be control opposition. I know that the first tactic is to take out the people with the knowledge. They want to take out all the seers, the shamans, all the people with wisdom and knowledge, and what you talk about.
And there's one point that I'm trying to drive home with everything I just said, and all it is that the Catholics and the Christianity, and there's been several phases. The initial creation of Christianity was for a purpose of making Jews convert to it, which they would just be happy, chilled out, pacified, and peaceful Jews that aren't going to rebel against Rome. Well, a few hundred years later, Council of Nicaea, they refashioned Christianity. They sort of gave it a upgrade, facelift, and standardized it. So it's been through phases, but all throughout, what it appears to be is that it's just an invention for a strategic purpose. It's not an actual. So what I'm trying to nail here, and it's hard for me to word because it's just, I guess it's just hard to put into words in a succinct way, is that I don't think that they ever stopped being pagans, right? Because Rome was pagan when it invented Christianity. Rome didn't adopt Christianity, it invented it to hand to the Jews who were giving them a bunch of problems, being rebels, because the Jews were literally rising up against Rome and having these rebellions. Now, when Rome invented Christianity, it did not become Christian. It just invented it as a thing to control a certain population. Later on, Rome did become Christian because the Christian cult took over. But what I'm saying, though, is that I think Rome was originally pagan, and it continues to be pagan. It never stopped being pagan. Think about that.
But also, what I've been noticing is that they take the pagan symbolism that exists on the planet, especially in like Europe, maybe Rome too, and they take the imagery and the symbolism and tweak it a little bit. For example, the salve or the sperm becomes blood. That's a very good example. So I think that upper echelons of the societies that are, like the secret societies and those kind of levels, they are more pagan. Because Catholicism is a death cult in one way. When I go to Stockholm and see the churches that are from 1100 BC, it's riddled with symbolic imagery of death, with the skull and bone symbol is everywhere, for example. And the image of Jesus is just a symbol of a suffering man, because we can go back to the Thor. The symbol of Thor is the X. It's like a T, but it's you can see Thor. The Thor symbol has a longer, like the Christian cross, for example. And the Thor symbol means your heart friend or your best friend. And now in symbolic aspect, you have this suffering man on the cross, nailed to the Thor or the cross. In symbolic aspect is that your best friend or your Thor friend is dead. It's a suffering image. They say that Jesus suffered for us people to, for our best. But in symbolical terms, if you look straight away, just take the symbolical aspect. This is nothing else but a death cult. In the old Catholic imagery is so riddled with death. But to go back a little bit, talking about this paganism in Rome, I think because they are stealing images to fit. I think it's like this. It's not so long ago paganism was the thing in Europe and in the world at large. So they need to go with the pagan symbolism because that is something that, according to Boksaga, has been going on for over 100 millions of years. At least 100 million
So
years.
they haven't been converting. Well, they've been converting the world into Romanism since before Christianity was invented.
Yeah,
And Christianity is just a continuation of that.
yes, it's
But
a power.
it started with their pseudo paganism, where all of their quote unquote pagan gods were just rip-offs of other pagan gods from other countries. Like the classical examples of Mars. Which one was the Greek and which one was the Roman? Mars and Ares.
Ares is a Greek.
Right. And the Roman version was Mars. It was just a rip-off.
Of course.
So they've been the pagan was just the first step of their long conversion of the world into Romanism. And then after they used that strategy for so long, they moved it into the next phase of which was Christianity. And
that's the taxation system, I think. If you look at it from an economical and geopolitical aspect, they always put the churches in those areas that is riddled with what do you call it? Strategic choke points, you could say. For example, you have a big lake, a very big lake, like Mälaren in Sweden is a very big lake. And to go to Strängnäs from there, you need to pass a very, very tiny choke point. And this is where they collected all the money. And everyone was forced to go to the church every Sunday. So then they took the boat and needed to go via those choke points where they could do the taxation, to pass or whatever. So how I look at the entire Catholic structure is just a big taxation on the materialistic view, and the geopolitical view. If you look at Israel, for example, Jerusalem, it's like the choke point of the world. If you look at take up Google Maps and look where Jerusalem is placed, then you can easily find out why it's so important to control that city. It's very comparable to Istanbul, which control this small passage up into the Russia and all of that. It's another one, and you have another choke point between Spain and what's the country? Gibraltar, it's called. That's also one of those. But Jerusalem or Israel and Istanbul is those two that is the most important. So to make this holy city in those places, if you look at from before, it's all about taxation and control of natural resources. On that, but all the pagan imagery and all of that, I was gonna say, it has to do with our ancestral memory, I would say. All those images and the imagery of the pagan world has been with us for so long compared to the Christian. And the Pope is the Papa. He's the grandfather. He's the Ukko. He's the Santa Claus. He's the hat. He's the head of the entire tribe in symbolical aspects. So they are going with the symbolism because it resonates with us people. And in the heathen world, the Asur people, or the top class in the society, the Asur people in Udenma, they were sort of enclosed from the Vanir people, the rest of the world. So the ordinary people couldn't go there and visit. It was a closed off, only for certain jättar or giants could go there. But I think they are trying to recreate their own version of, it's a different kind of version of the global control system that was existing before ice time and the tilt of the planet. And to do this, you need to sort of play on the imagos and the ancestral memory of the people on the planet that we have in common. In the Book Saga, we were a global civilization before the tilt of the planet, and maybe they know that. And to say that we have only been existing for 6,000 years or so, that they are saying, it's just absurd.
I got into on the Unslaved interview I did about the age of Gemini. The age of Gemini ended about 6,000 years ago, and all other considerations aside, I wonder if there's a psychological reason why. Maybe there's something really, really bad that happened 6,000 years ago that was traumatic in the memory that caused us to want to think that that's where everything started. In other words, we didn't want to look back further than that because we do everything psychologically to avoid looking at a painful memory, that's been sort of like erased from the memory. If there was something really bad that happened at the end of the age of Gemini 6,000 years ago, that could go a long way to explain why.
But this is very interesting. I need to pinch in. If you press, in the Book Saga, they talk about this, the first chaos, or the first kris, we say. A kris, like Kristendom, we say. Kris is a crisis. Kristendom, Christ. Kristendom is the word for Christianity in Swedish. You have a figure called Kristna, which is the first Christ in etymology. Christ, the first Krishna, and it's a god in India. And in the Väinämöinen Book Saga mythology, this Krishna figure, around 6,000 years ago, I think it actually is, he kills Narkasul in India and kills the heathen system that they had. And this is the first sort of creation of the philosophy, of the same philosophy that grew into Christianity. The first priests were called Brahma priests. So now the people of India should take a wife. And this Krishna came from Finland. It was some kind of flip out from the Asur family, so he brought a lot of knowledge with him, and also the cow, which was an Arctic creation that was developed during the ice time. The domesticated animals came about during the ice time, and also the knowledge of agriculture, because they needed to use seasons and they needed food for the winters. That's why you had domesticated animals and grain storages and all of those kinds of inventions. But anyway, this just came to my mind that in the book Saga they talk about this first kris or krist happened in India. I think it's like 3,000 something before Christ, 3 or 4,000. I don't know exact date, but anyway, the Jews came out from India, which was called rabbis. This was a title within the heathen system. To be one rabbi is a very, very high title, and they had no function in India when it became sort of Christian, or a man takes a wife and everyone can, it's a complete different system. We don't need to go into the heathen system. It's a lot of tapes of Eeyore and Jim talking about it. But anyway, my thought is just that it correlates a little bit with what you are saying. This flip out. But the you story we don't need to take now either. I just wanted to point that little thing that are coming from the mythology. Oh, it's a big thing.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on to the next topic. Alien Visitation and Genetic Manipulation. Now, that is the title of Michael Tsaryan's first book. I started listening to Michael Tsaryan back in 2008. And I'll tell you an interesting story. So I was listening to him and Jordan Maxwell. And both of them talk about Atlantis, advanced ancient civilizations where there was advanced technology in ancient times, and how myths, legends, and Bible texts, apocryphal texts, meaning books that were left out of the Bible, have deeper readings to them. And a lot of them read very well to interpret as an alien visitation. Zecharia Sitchin also came before Michael Tsaryan and Jordan Maxwell with his book series about Nibiru and the Sumerian alien visitations. And Michael Tsaryan's approach was unique because he brought Celtic mythology into the mix, which was even more descriptive of technological weapons and things like that. And also, Michael also brought in the Vedas, which is the Indian Sanskrit text. So I was checking that out back then. I'll tell you a story. I had downloaded some video presentations that Michael did where he was actually speaking in front of an audience, probably back in like 2005 or something like that. And he was delivering his theory about Atlantis to an audience. So I downloaded the video of that and showed it to my uncle and watched the whole thing. And of course, through the presentation, it wasn't all of this presentation about like aliens this and aliens that, blah blah blah. Not like it was so deep on so many levels. How really the theme of it wasn't just about aliens. It was about how like us as individuals have this great responsibility to look at the existence of evil on our planet. Why is it here? And how do you address it as a responsible human on this planet? How do you approach the problem and the question of evil? And why is evil even on our planet in the first place? And the aliens just factored into answering that question. So I showed this to my uncle, and all he had to say at the end of it was, I think you should really read about spiritualism instead of all this and going off and chasing aliens. It's like, that's, I was shocked by his comment, his reply, because like, I couldn't believe that that's all he got from watching it. Like, that's all he took away from it. There's so much more in it. But that same person I showed it to, a few years later, when Ancient Aliens came out on the History Channel, ever since, he's been glued to the fucking couch, dude, watching that show every new episode. The cognitive dissonance of shit talking the video I showed him, and the feeling that I got when they came out with that TV show was that they had to put something out to the public to make it seem like it was for whatever reason, right? Rather than let some small guy be the only one talking about it. I really think that, because scroll back to 2008, and anyone listening, please correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe you know better than me. But Jordan Maxwell, Michael Nassarian, and Zachariah Sitchin are the only people that I'm aware of that were talking about an alien visitation theory back then. Now, it demonstrates the pettiness of the mainstream, that they have to race in and come out with this whole new extravaganza just to make it where, yeah, because it's unbearable to them that there's a topic that only a small guy is, doing on his own, talking about. God forbid that there be a subject or something that they're not the experts on, right? That's the way it struck me anyways. But correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe someone knows more about it. It's not like I've turned over all the rocks or anything. But now I know that your views differ on the alien question. However, you can take the alien visitation question separately from the genetic manipulation question. You look at these texts, these ancient texts. And they do talk about the gods taking a normal human and turning them into something else. And especially when you look at Adam, the creation of the Adam, it appears that they took a normal human on Earth and created an atom out of it. So an atom was an invention, a genetic invention, a customized creature created by the gods. And in the Bible it says Elohim said, "Come, let us make man after our image, after our likeness." And Elohim is a plural word. It also is a female word. So it's plural and feminine. So is it a group of goddesses that decided to take the aboriginal man of the planet and create a new Adam out of it? The feminists like to poke fun at Eve and bring up the fact that Lilith was Adam's first wife, but Lilith was like this bad girl bitch that Adam didn't like because she couldn't be controlled easily or whatever, or she wasn't obedient, or So these feminists have this narrative about that. It's kind of like the pot calling the kettle black, though, because Adam himself is a customized creation to be more controllable. Does any of this agree with you, or I'll let you jump in here because I've already sort of trailed off down a few different trails, but I'll jump back in a minute.
I get a lot of thoughts. I'm just thinking, I start with saying that the Asur people, they were masters of genetic manipulation. If you look from the book Saga, they created all the nature around us. They even created new kinds of animals. The pine tree and the what do you call it in English? We call it tall. Anyway, they have stories that they have been creating animals and plants for different functions. And those people in Asgård during the Ice Age, they were completely isolated from the rest of the planet. So when the ice sheets were melting and they got an opening to get out in the world, they would look completely different, have been developed completely different over 50 million years. And they were also very strict and coordinated with the creation of humans. So I have no doubt that the level of knowledge when it comes to nature and the manipulation of nature must have been so high. I know that they were using sound frequency manipulation of moving rocks like megaliths and all those kind of things. And the knowledge of manipulating with frequency and sound is a topic that we are exploring like today, which is very fascinating subject in itself. That's one point I was thinking about even before I came into Book Saga, because I'm a musician in the ground. You can manipulate objects to vibrate with different tones. I remember when I had this speaker at home with the guitar plugged into it, and when I pulled a certain note, I could hear my copper, like I had copper objects in my apartment that started to vibrate only to a certain note and frequency, for example. So, but when it comes to what I was gonna say is that imagine that you have a culture that has been the highest culture with all the knowledge on the planet living in a area that has been closed off from 50 million of years from the rest of the planet. And then at some point, around 10,000 years ago, they gain access to the rest of the world because there were kilometers of ice surrounding us up here in Scandinavia. Wouldn't it seems to be very alien-like when you come from a 50 million year different kind of development under different kind of circumstances? I mean, there's so many ways to look at the alien in a materialistic, non-spiritual way. You know, my mother's sister, she's a psychic, and she barely talks about it, but she's in like the spiritual or under realm. In the book Saga, they talk about ande and soul, spirit and soul, and the spirit and the soul is like the most important thing that we have, and how to refurnish it in Valhalla. That's like the main goal. That's why the Asgard or Asgard, Midgard, is located on the North Pole, because that's the gate of Valhalla, and all the souls are traveling back to Valhalla via this ritual when you burn people and take their ashes, which is the essence of the person, and they put it in the oak tree. So this is a very spiritual concept, but I sort of believe, or I have experienced things myself when it comes to energies or entities, you know. And I know that people who takes like DMT, for example, they experience entities all the time. This is a very strange phenomenon, and it should be explored more, I think, with this kind of different dimension, you could say, because the myths are talking about, if there would be any alien interference or any kind of spiritual interference, I think it is something else than we see physically. So I personally don't believe that we have been visited by, you know, space lizards or those kind of. It's only a belief. I don't look at it in that sense. I don't even put focus into it.
What if the aliens didn't arrive here on any sort of craft or any sort of wormhole, sort of like Stargate SG-1 type of thing? What if aliens arrived here by being born through the humans who were already here? People ask, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, the egg came first because there was a different species that wasn't a chicken that existed before chickens existed, and they laid eggs, and one day one of those things laid an egg and a chicken came out of it instead of whatever it was that laid it. So there's the answer to your age-old question, which came first, the chicken or the egg? The egg came first. So if I've kind of been mulling over this idea, is that an alien could come to Earth by being born here.
I see what you're getting. There's actually, if you the story of how the human being was created is actually very similar in the book Saga. They talk about one monkey fucking one goat, and out come Frey and Freya, and they call it an Odin thing. It's like a Odin is the highest, Odin is the sun, but Odin is not only the sun, Odin is the entire galaxy. Odin is the creator. And in the book Saga, what we see in the sky is the source of our cosmos. And this is very like 1500s philosophy, when the sun is the center of the universe. So this is their philosophy from the heathen world, that everything is rotating around the sun that we are seeing, and there's no other suns. All the reflections in the sky that you can see is what they call stars, not planets. And it's what we see is the reflection of Odin, or the sun. But the entire thing is like one brain, you could say. So when the Earth is tilting, the entire galaxy follows, because the Earth is the second sun. There was two suns for a while, because Odin, or the sun that we see, created a second sun and turned into the Earth. That's why it's burning inside. And this is the cosmic egg in this story. Because it had like an eggshell with plasma that exploded and vaporized, and this is how Valhalla was created, and it's all connected to this cosmic. Everything is cosmic also in this book Saga, but the perspective is that there's no life as we know it outside of the planet we are living on in this galaxy.
Well, the alien, look at Victor Schauberger, and he brings up the idea of planetary motion versus techno-academic motion. And it's like two ways of thinking, or two ways of understanding, and it's also two ways of movement of matter that are completely different. And Victor Schauberger, the water wizard, observed nature. He talks about observing nature and the swirls in the water, these vortexes. There's a way that water is meant to move to create life, and there's a way that water is not meant to move. And he ranted endlessly about how the way that we pump water through these pump systems and pipe systems strips the potency and the life force out of the water by this process. And he calls that techno-academic motion. It's not the way that water is supposed to move. And this expands out into combustion engines and all of this technology that's based on this motion that's unnatural. And the opposite of that is planetary motion. That's the way that water is meant to move. Because when water is moving naturally in these vortexes, it's akin to the way that planets move. And there's a recent book published by James DeMeo called The Dynamic Ether of Cosmic Space. And it's talking about the orgone energy. And he visualizes the solar system as a vortex, and the planets orbit because the planets have found their spot within their distance from the sun in relation to this vortex, and the planets are sort of like floating on a current. So they've settled in their positions due to it being the spot where the inward draw of the vortex versus the centrifugal force of their movement is sort of balanced out. And this vortex is actual energy, it's orgone energy, which has a correspondence to water. And the way that water and orgone interact is how interesting. You can actually build orgone devices that modify the weather. But this vortex concentrates at the sun, and that's like what fuels the sun, because by the time that this vortex condenses to where the sun is, it's heating up the sun. And so the sun is burning from the action of all of this energy coalescing there. And as it's moving through space, it's like this open spiral, because the solar system isn't staying still. It's not like a circle. You can simplify it like that. But as it's moving in three-dimensional space, traveling, it's more like a spiral. Think of like a wheel rolling down the road. It's a circle, but also it's making a spiral. If you roll a wheel down the driveway, you can plot out the spiral motion. It's a circle and a spiral. It's just two ways of thinking about it, but all that motion is planetary motion. Now go to Wilhelm Reich. He talks about the sort of like schizoid split of thinking, to where you have mechanistic thinking and mystical thinking, which are two wrong ways of thinking, essentially, which don't touch the core of anything. It's the reason why you have political camps, the left and the right, because the liberals tend to be mechanical thinkers, and the right tend to be the conservatives tend to be mystical thinkers, but they're both pathological ways of thinking. Whereas he asserts functional thinking. He calls it functional thinking. So if there was some sort of split in like some sort of schizophrenic split in the human race that happened due to some trauma or something like that, that set us on this course, this wrong course, then you could equate that to like this alien strain. It's not so much like some sort of chromosome that you can look at under a microscope, so much as it is a genetic of like a spiritual genetics, I guess you could say. And I would advise looking into those concepts of Victor Schauberger. He talks about the planetary motion versus techno-academic motion. And I see that as being very similar to what Reich talked about with functional thinking versus mechanistic mystical thinking. This split in the mind that set the human race on a completely wrong course of direction.
But if you look at it like this, or if you again take it from the mythos, they talk about how the human being was created and how we got this kind of consciousness that we have. And if you look at the sun, for example, it's for me like a giant loudspeaker. It's the universe, the unifying verse that we're seeing when we're looking at the universe. It's in the name also. It's the universe. And light and sound are in principle sort of the same thing. It's just an light is an amplified sound on higher octave, you could say. And I think that's how you create a laser, for example. I'm not sure, but my point is that if you look at the Finnish mythology, the source of the consciousness derives from Odin or the sun. And we are persons or part sons. This is sort of a mystical or a more spiritual aspect of the book Saga, that when the animal has embla and we has sperm, and inside of the sperm is sort of the genetic archetype, or what makes us different from the animals is that we have the consciousness of the sun encoded into us, so to speak. We are spiritual beings in that sense that can produce different sounds and articulate, and we can manipulate our sounds. Birds can do that in some aspects also, but we have this beautiful gift of communication in a whole other level than maybe the whale also. It seems to be a thing across the planet in some degree, but we are kind of special, and also compared to it's us who really seems to be more alien-like. And when you're talking about the split of consciousness and trauma, I think this is sort of the course that has been happening, because there has been nothing but cataclysm. I think the Earth was much more stable before, in the consciousness level at least. Maybe we had more volcanoes and more active stuff on the planet going on, but when the galaxy shifts, the consciousness also shifts and become something else. And the manifestation of that happening is that we have this split in the planet also. We have the Arctical and we have the tropical. It's also a split. You have two types of consciousness emerging out of that, really. And when you start to mix between those, maybe there's also becomes a bigger rift in the consciousness in the people that has both the Arctic and the tropical, for example. That's a different question and a topic in itself, but it's just interesting when we can see it from this perspective also, when we have such an important in the sun and on the spiritual level, that our consciousness is sort of governed by the universe. And the astrologers would say the same, right? That the human consciousness, and with the what do you say, the astrology aspect into all of us, how we become like a little star in the cosmos. In the hidden world, everyone got a star that was in constellations. So everyone that died was remembered by stars. So if your family tree belongs to some constellation, you will also go there in their worldview. So it's like a remembrance of that person. You can stare to that star and think about your grandfather, for example. That's his star, and so on. So this is very connected to the cosmos and the universe. This hidden. It sounds so simplistic. We have only the pieces that are the root or the groundwork, so to speak. But to go into the entire worldview and cosmology, everything is based on it, really. For example, Lemminkainen or Balder, he represents the sun, the creator. He is the one that produces the next pantheon or the next generation of the Aser family. And his brother, the oldest brother, Ra, he represents the moon on Earth, for example. So there's a lot of, what is above is also below in this. So it has a natural harmony. And you can see how the moon, you're talking about water and how it's connected with the astronomical aspects and those flows. I think the best example is to look at the moon, what it does with the tides, for example. It's just such a good example to explain what you're trying to say in a more, what you can see. Especially if I go to Norway, the water tide will go up and down by 2 to 3 meters, each day. It has a huge impact, just the moon. And the astrologers are calculating those cycles also, but it affects our consciousness, right? Yeah, heavy topics, Caleb.
Yep. So let's move on to our final bullet point.
Yeah.
The ringlands.
The ringlands.
The ringlands.
Okay, I can...
I like maps. I've always liked maps.
Me too.
So the first thing that pops in my mind is how would this look like on a map?
I've been trying to. But do you want to speak your mind on it, or should I rant a little bit?
Has anyone ever, are you aware of any segment of, say, a wall or something that would represent the border of one of the ringlands?
Okay, if you mute. I don't think that they made walls around the ringlands. I think the ringlands is just what you could say. It's like one hertigdöme, or it's one satellite of, or mimication of the first ringland. When the people of the planet started to populate, and we were just one race with one head, so there was a lot of space on the Earth to populate slowly. But they came up with a math, and somehow they knew how big the planet was, to calculate, to create ringlands that covered the globe, like one football, for example. You can see how one football is divided perfectly around one globe in those, tiny. If you look at an old football, for example, you can see, like in China, they have like a lion holding on a globe that is divided on hexagram formations. This secret geometry kind of mathematics. This is the type of mathematics they have been dividing their structure on to create ringlands. And of course, where it's water, there was no ringland, obviously. But it's a systematic way of dividing up one sort of, you could say, I don't like to say empire, but a kingdom, more or less. And the first ringland, according to Väinämöinen mythology, where the human race emerged from, is the North Pole. And the North Pole has significant properties compared to the rest of the planet because of Valhalla Gate. You have the Northern Lights, which is strange. I think you have Northern Lights in the south, perhaps, also. But it has to do with this magnetic field and how we know magnetic fields as some kind of force, but what does it really does in a more spiritual sense and aspect. And yeah, it's just the structure that they used to populate the planet when there was no, like, what do you call it? Opposition. Imagine you have a free board and you just can enjoy your life and create something beautiful, and a system that I think it might have to do what we call with ley lines and force energies, perhaps, that that people talk about, that there might be energy poles that you could calculate exactly where the highest sort of force emerging out from the earth or something like that.
Well, if you also had, say, a certain race of people who could see the magnetism line, sort of like they say birds are able to actually see the magnetic lines, or they're able to somehow perceive it, right? Because part of their biology or part of their brain wired to their eyeballs and their optic nerve, somehow they're able to really actually perceive the magnetism of the earth.
Can I point in here?
Say again?
Can I just point in one thing here?
Yeah.
The bird, it's funny you're mentioning the bird when we are talking about the magnetic fields and those. The symbol of the bird in the heathen world is the symbol of the spirit. They take the bird as an symbolic aspect for the spirit, because it might have something to do with what you're saying. They know how to sense or feel those magnetic currents or the forces. Yeah.
Yeah, the bird in Egypt was a symbol of the soul. And yeah, considering that, that also links it to the earth and the magnetism, and why that would be a symbol for the soul. But yeah, these precise measurements that they came up with, I've considered that it's possible these measurements were derived at a time where maybe the Earth's magnetic field was stronger, and you had certain people who could literally see them. So it wouldn't have been this big, complicated operation to derive these measurements, when all it would take is somebody to go out and measure what they saw right there in front of their eyes, which, you or me, a normal person might not be able to see. But if this person was able to see it, then they could just measure it out, standardize that measurement, and then that's the measurement that they use from that point forward, and they would know by simple math what the rest of the earth measured out to be. So the original measurement process might have been a lot simpler than what we assume it would have had to be,
But if you, I'm thinking about, if isn't there like the sphere of the earth has a relation to the distance to the moon, for example? Isn't it something like that?
There probably is. I know that if you take if you were to put the moon and the Earth together, touching, um, and draw a line dividing the Earth in half, and make a point on to the top of the moon, that triangle is the exact ratio of the pyramid. And then there's other correlations like yes, I'm almost positive that the answer is yes, because I've seen a lot of those correspondences, and there's too many. It boggles the mind how many of them there are.
I'm thinking about this guy Cliff Barber, who got obsessed with the Bug Saga from a more from the sacred geometry aspect. There's videos actually of him when he finds the alphabet inside of the sacred geometry. When you expand far enough out and go into details into this type of mathematics with the sacred geometry, I think you could probably find a lot of answers to the universe, when it comes to the relationship between, or for example, the distance to the moon, the exact radius or diameter of the planet, and all of those aspects. Maybe not exactly, but how many ringlands that you need to have to cover it in a perfect shape, for example, and the distance. I don't know exactly, but I'm pretty sure you can find more than we know today. And this is also a topic that should be explored more, like Cliff Barber did, that he actually found the alphabet inside in a perfect circle, exactly like how Bug Saga explains the alphabet. It's a circle that goes around, and inside of this circle, with the different sounds, which is A, Aser, B, Borg, C, Skära, D, Dag, etc. They have different meanings. You can branch out endlessly on them, but they create this entire society structure. And I've been talking about this many times before, how the alphabet is the basis of the entire system, the pagan system, and it's stored inside of the alphabet. And the alphabet in itself branches out later to language, and it keeps just rolling out like that. But inside of this is also, I would say, cosmic. You can find cosmic answers also, I think, with this type. So yeah, that's what I was thinking about this.
Yeah, I've accumulated a good handful of sources as well over the years talking about similar things, and it seems like it's scattered through different books by different people, and some of them make videos. I don't know how it would all come together in this grand way. Like if you were to just collect it all, the amount of work that would take, and plus how do you really make sense of it all? Because you see these correlations here, there, and the implication is that they all flow together somehow, but I don't think anybody's figured out exactly how. And that might go back to the idea that we're operating on the wrong type of thinking anyways, and that's why we're not going to probably make sense of it. Even though it's obvious that they're so correlated together, these measurements, because I'll throw out some examples. Bonnie Gaunt has a book called The Magnificent Numbers of the Great Pyramid and Stonehenge, and it gets into these correlations between the Great Pyramid and Stonehenge, the moon, the earth, these measurements, expanding it out to like I think she has like these circles stacked out, one circle next to the next, like 10 of them or 9 of them. And I think each one is the same circle size as the moon or the earth. I can't remember. It's been so long. That's just one example. She has a whole book full of these correspondences that will boggle your mind. Ralph Ellis has a ton of material in his books with these measurements. Certain guests that have been on Unslaved. I got this interview by this guy who broke down the mathematics of the 9/11 event, the Twin Towers, how they've been doing all of these attacks on certain timings, and the mathematics that he derives by measuring the times and locations of not just the 9/11, but also these other attacks that happened before that, are so precise that it comes down to the millisecond, because he's converting numbers from days to miles or to degrees of angle, which is weird because what it boils down to is the number itself. They coded those numbers to where they show up either in the amount of days between two events. For example, there was some event that happened in Kenya, an attack, which was like 10 years before 9/11 happened, but the exact number of days expressed as like even down to the second, when you express it as a decimal number, right, was the same distance between the Statue of Liberty and something else, right? Insane amount of correspondence, right? So there's that, and you have others.
I have a good example also. Are you familiar with this the Urelinas work? He has been after like those forces for a while. Like,
yes.
Yeah. He talks about in the beginning of his book Under the Sign of Scorpio. I think it's a very important book. I have it on my shelf. He talks about the timing of the storming of the Winter Palace, and it's exact. It's astronomically calculated. He claims that when they have been storming and taking the Winter Palace in Russia, before there's one guy standing and taking exact on the second that they are going to open the doors and announced that they have been sort of taking over. So, and this is the exact sort of on the minute that the sign of Scorpio is in its peak. Like It's so important for them to do this on the exact second. That's why the entire book is called Under the Sign of Scorpio, The Rise and Fall of the Soviet Empire. It's very, very interesting detail to also take into this. And he picks up other aspects also that are happening under the sign of Scorpio, America also. I recommend that book very strongly. The Under the Sign of Scorpio.
Yeah. Well, see, there's groups that are using it, but they didn't invent it.
No.
And there's people who are writing books about it, and I'm talking about the mathematics and the geometry, but they didn't invent it. I think that all of this came together in a previous age where the thinking itself was different. And that's why we can only really glimpse into it from our point of view, is because our point of view is coming from a different mental process. We don't think the same way that we did before. And if we're sort of infected by this like wrong way of thinking, and I'll point again to Victor Schauberger, he rants endlessly against this techno-academic thinking. Wilhelm Reich rants endlessly against this mystical, mechanical thinking as being a wrong way of thinking. And those systems of geometry, or, you know, it was derived in an age where people were thinking probably more along lines of the planetary motion type of description. But when we're looking at these 9/11 attacks and these Soviet Union under the sign of the Scorpion, maybe that is the poison root of a different system, the alien strain of the type of thinking, which is rivaled against the natural order of things. You know,
I can circle back if you to circle back where we began with the Tor friends and the natur. It says a lot. The nature is meant for us to draw knowledge from and to study. That's what the word nature really means. It's the place, the field of study, exactly like Victor Schauberger is talking about, because I think it was like a brother for him or a relative who went to the university, and he, you know, the university was like the destruction of the mind a little bit, you know. Those people who went to the university, they got their mind destroyed. That's how I read his opinion on the matter. Everything you need to study is in the forest, and you can learn from the forest. And that's exactly what he did, because he studied the forest. He was touring in the nature, or touring in the knowledge. And the heathen people, they are basing their entire structure on nature philosophy and nature science. That's the only thing that I can derive from the book saga or the mythology. You know, everything is deriving from patterns in nature. The entire system is nature based, and cosmos included.
so I also feel like there's a heavy dream component to the Norse mythology, because from what I understand about dreams and how they actually work, what their function is and everything. And reading the Norse mythology, they seem like dream sequences, and the symbolism really leans, in my perception, it leans towards like the way that symbols would work in a dream. And one of the things about dreams is that when there's some sort of solution that you're consciously unable to come up with, sometimes dreams function as trying to provide you with that solution that you're seeking. And one of the things about dreams is that you can have multiple different dreams that are completely different. They have different people in it. They're in different places, but they're all telling you the same thing, and eventually you can figure it out. And even hypnotists use this technique of telling their hypnotic subject to have dreams with the same meaning, but they're different. So the person will have multiple dreams, and each dream is completely different, but once you cross-reference them all, you can see how there's this continuity, and then you can solve it. And that's how the Norse mythology strikes me, is that you have all of these different episodes, you know, Thor, Loki, and Odin go walking out this way and they do this and that. And then in a different story, it's different people doing something different. But I feel like it's in the same way that dreams with the same meaning can be completely different on the surface, but there's that underlying current that's the same meaning, and I really get that. It just switches it up, sort of like when you're dreaming, it switches up the imagery, but it's trying to inform a certain solution.
Well, dreams can be very confusing, but I get what you're saying. I'm thinking about like the archetypes have different faces in different cultures and different connotations, you know, but they are sort of, if you compare like the Greek and the Greek pantheon to the Norse pantheon, they are sort of alike. The pantheon is consisting of, what I know, of 12 images. It's a sort of a, they have some of the I'm sure they might have been lost, some of the archetypes. Maybe it's a fragmented, but I can see correlations within the archetypes. It's just different phases, different approaches, trying to mimic the same archetype, I would say. Something in that fashion. And our different tribes have different ways of, or have different phases of the archetypes, perhaps. And maybe that is stored within our genetic code or racial memory, I don't know. Because I think this is what it really boils down to, is to mimic the archetypes, or living up to the archetypes that we were giving from the beginning of the human race. Or I don't know how that sort of happened, or how it, I mean, if the human race is over 100 million years, we cannot even place our mind into their heads, you know. It's different consciousness, different everything different. So I think we have become so fragmented, like I was talking about before, with the tilt of the planet and the galaxy and the cataclysms, and all of this has made us a very fragmented species in large, where we are trying to reclaim the primordial archetypes, and by trying to do so, we have been creating different facades or faces of the archetypes, but they are all the same in the primordial foundation, I would say. That's my take on your dreams, because for example, the Hermes or the trickster archetype is very similar to maybe the Loki archetype.
Well, I take a tip from Michael Desarian, and one of the things he's often said about dreams is that the details, the symbols, etc., all of the things that are normally focused on in dream interpretation are a small percentage, or even completely insignificant compared to the feeling of the dream, because the dreams will have a feeling, and that's really the central thing. And with the Norse mythology, there seems to be like this underlying feeling, no matter what story it is or which characters are in it.
Maybe because it's the original or primordial undercurrent, you know.
Right. And if you approach it as, say what if the Norse mythology is dream sequences, then the interpretation method would be really feel what the underlying current of feeling is that is being conveyed through those stories, regardless of which characters are in any particular episode. Because what I see is that there's a feeling that is similar, and it doesn't matter if it's a story that's, you know, happening here in this banquet hall with Thor, or if it's a story in a different place. I always sense or detect this, like, this current feeling.
Let me say something that is coming from Box Saga. They talk about the North Star that is situated right above the North Pole. And in this story, the North Star represents knowledge. And I'm thinking like the transmitter of the archetypes, or the current, could be coming from the North Star, straight down to the planet where the Valhalla is, and then transmitted from there. This current, which is originating from the sun, or something in that fashion. But they talk about the North Star being very important. And the word throne, or tron, throne, the chair that the king is sitting on. Tron, you have tro, which means to believe, and en, the North Star. So you have the belief in the North Star is right into the word throne, and the throne is situated straight under the North Star there on the what is called this Raasepori castle that they had in Finland, which was the seat of the king, which is on an island which you can still go and look at. It's called Raasepori castle, and this was the throne castle where Ra was situated and transmitting the information and the knowledge from there. This there was a tower where Ra was could be standing, and when he was speaking there was a lake around it at that time, so the voice would amplify. But I think it's very interesting that what you are talking about, that there's some kind of, you can detect this and it's different and it's floating within, you can sort of detect this. I know what you're talking about. It's sort of a feeling, but I think it's like the origin or the primordial sort of archetypes that your consciousness is resonating with in that fashion. And you can see, like, even still today, in the consciousness level and the invention and the creation of new technologies and this sort of being a figurehead or a leading in fields, the Swedes and the Scandinavians are also, they are very sharp on this even still today. They are leading in many ways in society today. Sweden is a role model for the EU's Agenda 2030, we call it. It's the, what is translated in, but anyway, it seems to be, everything seems to be flowing from the top down. It looks like so. All those new groundbreaking things are coming often up from here, and it has been so for hundreds of years. And it has, if you look at it historically. But I think it has to do with this current of consciousness that is flowing via the North Star, then sort of this kind of flow of consciousness. I don't know, I've been thinking about this before actually, why they situate the North Star to be the source point of knowledge. Very strange, but I just wanted to put that in there because it's coming from this old mythos, and you even put the tro in the North Star, or the belief in the North Star, in the actual name of the seat of the king. Must be important. Tron, the throne. Yeah.
Let's leave it there.
Okay. Let's do so. Alright, I'm gonna say something. Caleb, you need to. This was an interesting conversation, Caleb. We the topics sort of blended into each other in a very strange way, but I always enjoy talking to you, man. Thank you for this.
It's been great. I appreciate having you.
All right, we round it off there then. Hopefully we can keep up doing this and keep everything rolling.
I already have the next one planned.
Good. Okay, we talk another time then, Caleb. Take care.
Okay, take care.